Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about negotiations. I have been working most of my life with the military or along military forces. Today I'm with OCHA's Civil Military Coordination Service. Most of you don't know me, and most of you know this gentleman. I'm showing Nelson Mandela because he is one of the greatest negotiators this world experienced. And he mentioned once that in his 27 years of imprisonment, he deeply developed the values of patience, discipline, and empathy. In our session, we look at 7 learning outcomes. The first 3 are related to the theory, to this session, what we are doing right now, and the other 4 are related to our negotiation exercise. All the material is based on 3 publications. The first one is the Handbook on Humanitarian Negotiations. The second one is a publication from Roger Fisher. And the third one on the communication is on the elements of influence. Negotiation What For is the title. And here we are already at the principles for good humanitarian negotiations. The 5 standards are part of a good agreement. First one, we must meet the needs of the people. Second, we must be able to implement the agreement. Third, it must specify obligations and responsibility. Fourth, it must be sustainable over a certain period of time. And fifth, we must keep a good relationship. Some people are saying it's more important to lose an argument and to win a relationship or to sustain a relationship. There are a number of useful terms in negotiations. The position, the interest, and the need. The position is quite often the initial opening statement. The interest, I find my motivation. What do I really care about? And then what do I really need? I realized that when negotiating or talking with the military, there is always this need for visibility. And everyone has a need for visibility. And the art is how to satisfy each other's needs. A professor in the Columbia Business School, he always said there is nothing like a win-win situation. It is just about the post-negotiation satisfaction. How satisfied are we with fulfilling our needs? It really comes down to the lever. What do I have? What handle can I turn to persuade the other stakeholder, to persuade the counterpart? How many of these levers do I have? So when I have a scenario and when I develop my strategy, I have to think of activating these levers. The soon of possible agreement is something I discuss in the next slide. Referring to the law is not always my preferred options. For sure, we have to be conscious about international norms, standards, and guidelines, and we should be very knowledgeable about them in our negotiations. But it's not always the best and the first way to refer to the law, to refer to a Security Council resolution. I think we are much better off to refer to values and other social norms and standards. When it comes to the best alternative to a negotiated outcome, that's our bottom line. This red line we must establish during our strategy development. Where is the line where I walk away from the negotiations, and I try it another time. But I'm not going to cross my partner. The humanitarian negotiation framework has 4 steps. The first one, and the most important element, is the objective, to define the objectives. And in the analysis, I must already look ahead to the face-to-face part. How I will approach the face-to-face part, and what do I have in my hands from an emotional, from a legitimate, but also from a very rational persuasion or influencing point of view. The second part, the strategy, has to be developed together with a negotiation team if I go into this negotiation as a team. Some people are not very strong with certain areas. For instance, I have problems with child soldiers. So when I am approaching a checkpoint, I would never now sit in the front seat of a car. I would have someone else from the team talking to child soldiers. This is what we have to consider in developing the strategy. In the critical part of the face-to-face negotiation, we must pay attention to cultural diversities. Negotiation, communication is done all over the world in a different way. And sometimes to read the air and to read between what is said and what is expressed through body language and other non-verbal communication is quite important. And for sure, it should not stop here. The follow through and monitoring the agreement and the outcomes are equally important. This is the most important chart of this presentation. Here is the party A and party B, and they both have a position, an interest, and a need. In our effort to negotiate an agreement from a humanitarian point of view, we must get into this zone of possible agreement. And this is our communication skills, our persuasion techniques, what we are using to get into this zone, so that we satisfy both parties' needs and maybe also both parties' interests. Only in this zone of possible agreement will a long-lasting agreement, where both parties take responsibilities and their obligations, will happen. Let us reflect for a moment on activating the levers. I would most likely start at the bottom or at the top. As a last resort, I would use loud advocacy or the media. When we are using these tools of loud advocacy or the media, there is almost never a way to return to the negotiation table. How do we do this? How do we get into the SOPA, into the zone of possible agreement? Well, it's about effective communication. And effective communication consists of body language, active listening, and assertive communication. Going back to Nelson Mandela and his value of patience, it's a key value for negotiations and for active listening. If I have the answer ready, I want to jump in, I want to interrupt, I want to talk over others. But active listening and also showing the counterpart that we are actively listening to what they have to say is key for the negotiations. The body language and the non-verbal communication is also an important part. We are 70% of our time we are communicating, 70%. And the 70% are then divided into 7% of verbal communication, which makes an impact, 38% of voice inflection, and 55% are related to non-verbal communication. So actually, the spoken word is a very small percentage of effective communication. Here we are back to our elements of influence. And this 5 tips on the slide, they make a difference in our life. The you statements replaced with I statements. You should do this. You must do this. Instead of we must learn. We must catch up with the program. That makes already a big difference in the communication. Some people say no. For me, it does. The why in the past. I just dislike it. Why did you do this, Joseph? Why did you do this? It's over. It's over. There are other ways to ask the same. What are the reasons? What are your concerns? How did it come about? The mistake what I made is still the same. The question is a different one. The but and the however, we call it verbal erasers. That's my favorite. If I read a document from our office, every second paragraph I can see however. We did a good job, however. You look good, Joseph, but. Instead of saying we made a lot of progress and there is still a lot of room for improvement. But the verbal eraser makes everything before the but or however irrelevant. I also had a supervisor long time ago. He was a master in saying, wouldn't you think? Wouldn't you think? And there was very little room for saying, no, I think something different. Because the opinion was already so strong that as a junior new staff at the United Nations, I would have never said, no, I don't think. I think you are totally wrong. And then my favorite, when I, not only in oral communication, but also when I receive an email and someone says, as I have told you in my email half a year ago, and so it makes me really feel stupid. I would much more prefer the person just repeats what they said. One of our emergency relief coordinators, one of the past emergency relief coordinators, he was an expert in it. And normally politicians are very good in repeating. When I think of town hall meetings where the same questions come again and again, and this particular emergency relief coordinator was so patient, and he kept repeating what he said. And then moving on from this 5 tips, there is the questioning technique. There are questions, they increase tension, and there are questions, they diffuse tension. And when it comes to the questions which escalate basically the hostility, we are back to the 5 tips on the first one, on the why question, and on the leading questions. Multiple questions. I admire those people who can follow multiple questions. Most of the time, I hear from panelists, let me start at the last one. Because multiple questions are very difficult to handle if we are not very skilled in patience and paying attention and active listening. Close-ended questions, yes or no. When there is a very complicated subject, people are saying, do you agree? Yes or no. I feel cornered somehow. There's no way to maneuver when we get closed questions. And then this assumptive questions, what I mentioned earlier. At the same time, we have those questions which diffuse hostility or diffuse tension. I have colleagues, they would always say, what do you think? What do you think? That's a very open-ended question and a very consultative approach. Probing, curiosity, to go a little bit deeper. I'm interested in this subject. Can you tell me more about it? That helps diffuse tension. Seeking clarification. And repeating, maybe paraphrasing, saying back what I heard. That's also a technique to diffuse tension in communication. Let me summarize this brief presentation. The first point is that humanitarian negotiations need discipline. We must prepare for the negotiations. We must prepare for our counterpart. We offer, in this regard, a minimum preparedness sheet. The second point, what I wanted to make, is that it is important to keep the relationship, to sustain the relationship. So establishing a rapport with our counterparts is a very important element of the process before we are going into the very hard issues. We are saying to separate the problem from the person. Oh, that's not very easy. Ideally, we should separate the two things. Using assertive communication skills, developing and investing in our persuasion skills, from the very emotional to the social to the rational aspects of persuasion, including legitimizing our role and our behavior. And we would not do all of this if it wouldn't be for the population. So we must find agreements which meet the needs of the people. Thank you very much and good luck.